Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Marshall and I'm from the Training Accreditation Council, and I'd like to welcome you all to this workshop, the course accreditation process. This workshop forms part of the Training Accreditation Council's education program and aims to provide practical guidance on the principles and techniques required and the process to be followed for course accreditation. As you may be aware, TAC last week delivered a session titled Developing Units of Competency for Accredited Courses that complements today's session. A recording of both that and today's session will be provided shortly on the TAC website, www.tac.wa.gov.au, under the Education Program calendar page. Moving on to today's session, this morning I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Whadjuk people on whose land we record today and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to introduce our presenter today, Cherry Hawke. As you may know, Cherry has been an auditor with TAC for many years and is also an accreditation reviewer. So who better than to provide information on the course accreditation process? Cherry is extremely knowledgeable on the topic presented today, and if you have a question, please type it into the chat box and Cherry will do her best to answer as we go. Well, without further delay, I'll hand you over to Cherry for delivery of today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Welcome, everybody. I just want to start by saying or reminding people that this webinar is not about becoming an RTO. Sometimes we have people who log on who see accreditation and registration as the same thing. And so just to be clear, we're talking about developing our own course and accrediting it so that it has the same status as anything in a training package. I also want to just check that you have handy the documents that you were actually sent out. We don't refer to them all in full, but just so that you've got them on hand in case you want to follow along and ask any questions at the time. So you should have the course accreditation flowchart, the process for the application and what happens after that. ACC1, the application for course accreditation or reaccreditation, the course document template, which we do spend some time on today, the unit of competency template, which we don't look at in detail because, as Claire said, we do a separate unit of competency workshop webinar on how to actually write the units of competency, but we do go through what it contains. We also have a qualification template and, of course, the handout for the activities that we're going to be doing. So just to give you the big picture, if you like, about what accreditation is, there are two ways to achieve national recognition, and one is through training packages, and of course the other is through the development of accredited courses. With the training packages, they're developed by the industry reference committees supported by skills service organisations, SSOs, and the SSOs generate a 4-year work plan, and industry requirements for the development of new and revised training products are then prioritised in order of need. So as you can imagine, small niche areas of the industry sometimes find it really difficult to have their requirements highly prioritised, and therefore they suffer delays in having their needs addressed. A key benefit of the accreditation process on the right-hand side there is its speed to market. And so the process is a valuable addition to training package development, and it allows for niche industry sectors to develop their own nationally recognised courses quite quickly. New and emerging industries can move quickly to develop new skills in the workforce. New technology and new ways of working that demand immediate upskilling can also be catered for. Eventually, many of these new competencies may end up in training packages, but there are also some specialist areas that have always been served only by accredited courses. So courses with educational or community outcomes rather than vocational outcomes often fall into this category, as do bridging or pathways qualifications. Not all courses need to be nationally recognised, of course. So one of the things you do when you're thinking about developing a course is first identify if having the course nationally recognised is important to the industry stakeholders. Otherwise, you can just deliver a privately non-accredited course. And there are many examples of this occurring. For example, IT courses, vendor training in the IT industry. None of that is accredited through the national system, but they have their own accreditation process and give out certificates for different levels of learning. You certainly can't underestimate the investment required to accredit your own course, not just in terms of the fees and any costs to engage assistants in writing units of competency, but also the time and the energy commitment in engaging stakeholders, working with them to ensure industry requirements are addressed, validating the final product with them prior to submission, and throughout the process collecting evidence at every step of the way to support your application when you actually send it in. So we talked about investment, and here of course are the fees that are related to accrediting a course. It's crucial that the course is backed by an enterprise, industry or community organisations to justify the effort and the expense of having it accredited. When thinking about investing in an accredited course, it's also important to know that a subsequent version of the training package may at some future date overtake the accredited course. And so therefore there's a limited window of opportunity for any applicant to capitalise on their investment through owning the course and delivery of material and assessment tools that might be developed for it. The application lodgement fee of $8,070 is non-refundable, is payable at the time of submitting your application. The application does not progress to review until the invoice is paid. Where an amendment, this is the second part on the screen, which is $2,290, where an amendment involves updates to imported units from training packages that have been identified as equivalent on TGA, the amendment would be processed without the fee. So if you have some imported units in your qualification that you develop, and they're from training packages, if they happen to update and they're equivalent, there is no actual cost for the amendment in that case. So the preliminary requirements before you actually get down to doing the actual development, the course of course must meet a training need that cannot be met by a currently endorsed training product. You must be able to prove that the course outcomes cannot be achieved under existing training package qualification rules. And if a later version of the training package addresses the same need, then your course does not get re-accredited. It's important to understand that an accredited course with vocational outcomes is not a set of curriculum documents or training materials. It's essentially a work specification for each unit of competency where each unit of competency must reflect a work outcome. A common error that we see is that many course developers identify training requirements rather than workplace requirements when they try to write their units, and they focus their assessment requirements on the learning environment rather than on the workplace. So they put in things like, students must describe how to do certain things, but of course with accredited courses and units of competency, we're interested in actually doing the work, not writing about how they will do it. So the focus is always reflecting the work whenever you're developing your course, and the training that addresses that course will come later. So your application does not include lesson plans, training and assessment strategies, trainer resumes, assessment tools, and so on, because these will be developed by the delivering RTO as part of their application to include the course on their scope. And if you are an RTO and you're writing your own course document, you must write it as a set of rules for any training provider to follow, and don't simply describe how you intend to deliver and assess the course. Some course owners, of course, do develop delivery materials and assessment resources outside of the accreditation process, and they either require RTOs to use them for a fee, or must use them, or may use them. It's still the RTO's responsibility to ensure that any resources developed must fully comply with the required outcomes of the accredited course. And we have had some course owners who then have developed materials that actually don't comply with the course requirements, even though they wrote the course in the first place. So the easy answer to the question on the screen now is anyone. Anyone can apply to have a course accredited. However, if you're an RTO and you're registered with one of the other regulators, ASQA or the VRQA, you must accredit your course through that regulator. Only TAC registered RTOs and non-RTOs, like organisations or individuals, are able to have a course accredited through TAC. The course may be designed to meet a niche or niche industry needs, particular client needs, changes in industry technology or processes. Some of the reasons why people have course accredited is that industry or enterprise or community need the gap training. The national recognition for the students undertaking the course is seen to be important. Sometimes industry requires that all of its training is nationally recognised, so it won't look at private courses. They'll only look at courses that end up with a statement of attainment or a qualification. Sometimes industry wants delivery that's only done by RTOs because they see that there's quality requirements on RTOs. Sometimes it's a quality assurance issue, and sometimes it's just an investment. Accreditation does offer the opportunity to have nationally recognised units of competency for niche training that cannot be provided through a legitimate arrangement of the training package units. What does the course consist of? You'll notice I'm not reading from the slides on the screen because I think that's too boring to just read there. So I'm leaving that to you to read, and I'm just adding my take on it for you. So accredited courses can consist of units of competency sourced from one or more training packages. You could be developing units of competency with gaps. You might be developing modules which are comprised of learning outcomes. If as a course developer you can justify to TAC that it's not possible to develop units of competency, or a combination of these approaches. More and more we're seeing qualifications and short courses that have a mix. They'll have some units that are already out there that they can save time by not having to develop them. Sometimes they develop their own. They also might develop one or two modules to provide the underpinning knowledge, learning. So a combination is starting to be very common. If you determine that the course should contain modules or consist of modules, you must obtain permission from the Training Accreditation Council prior to development and submitting an application. You can refer to the TAC website for more information on modules and the application required to develop modules. Okay, so on this screen, I'm really going to talk to number one, and then just number two and number three will just sit there as well. But for the first one, of course, it says you can build your own course. And course, unless it's accredited by TAC. Accreditation is confirmation by TAC that courses are based on an established industry, enterprise, education, legislative or community need. Accreditation specifies validated competency outcomes and related assessment requirements. It ensures that the course meets national quality assurance requirements, standards for accredited courses, and the standards for training packages in relation to units of competency. There's only about 3 of the standards from training packages that relate to units of competency. And that's reflected anyway in the templates for our standards for accredited courses. So the National Quality Assurance requirements relate to course outcomes, structure, delivery and assessment requirements. In relation to the standards for accredited courses, this year the new national standards for accredited courses, the AQTF 2021, came into operation, replacing the AQTF 2007 standards for accredited courses. The standards for accredited courses are identical across the three regulators. A few years ago in WA, there was quality improvement of the templates for our units of competency and our accredited course document to align to where training packages were heading. And as a result, we have already been reviewing our courses against the latest requirements, and the new standards don't actually impose anything new if you're a WA RTO or WA course owner. Accreditation confirms that courses align to the nominated AQF level for the qualification, or they will lead to a statement of attainment for units or short courses. And then you can see after accreditation, registration must happen. You can own the course, but you can't deliver it unless you're an RTO. And the last box there, that if you are an RTO wishing to deliver, you must add it to your scope. It's not automatic that you have it on scope just because you own it. So let's review the stages in actually having our course accredited. These stages here are in the flowchart that we actually sent you, but the flowchart doesn't, you'll notice, doesn't contain stage 2, which is course development, because that's something that you do as the course owner. It also, of course, doesn't include stage 6. Simply because that happens after the course has been accredited. Sorry, I had to switch off there for a cough. But following on, we're going to work through the detail of the 6 stages of course accreditation as provided on this slide. And these stages can, of course, also be followed along on the flowchart if you want to. Note that any questions that you submit will be woven through. So some have already been submitted before the course, and we've already put those into the session. And we're going to actually just move on to the first stage. So first up, stage 1, research and consultation. So the first step is to identify the need for the course and identify and consult with your stakeholders. Stakeholders might include enterprise or industry clients, for example, employers, industry organisations, industry regulators, the skills service organisations, if you happen to be accrediting a course in one of their areas, WA training councils, same thing. They cover certain areas of the industry, group training organisations, unions. You might speak to any or all of those stakeholders. Then you would look at the intended vocational, educational, regulatory or community outcomes, and to do that you might look at job roles, work functions or specialist skills and knowledge relating to the proposed outcomes. You might look at the competencies it might cover, the scope and the breadth of the course, any statutory licensing or regulatory requirements, any future directions such as upcoming changes in technology and skill requirements. And the first step, of course, is to determine course feasibility, whether or not the course does actually need to be accredited or whether there's some other way of fulfilling that particular need, which we mentioned before. You might look at the extent of market demand, potential employment market for graduates of a vocational course. You have to ensure that there is no duplication of the title or outcomes of an existing course. The applicant must always consult with the relevant bodies, the SSOs or the WA training councils, for example, to ensure there's no duplication. And this is if the course fits into their particular area. And you'll find that there are questions about that. in the accreditation application. And you have to identify if it falls within their purview, and if it does, that you should contact them, make sure that what you're planning doesn't actually duplicate something that's already there. You must also search the National Register and keep a record of what you find, whether or not the courses are applicable, and if not, why not. Sometimes people do a lovely little table and say, we looked at all of these, and next to it they write, not applicable. Well, that's straight away a flag for me to go to training.gov and look in great detail at why you didn't say whether or not they were applicable or not. So, for example, we've just made this one up, but if we were proposing to accredit a course that related to holistic counselling, for example, we would go to training.gov and we would have a look. And the idea is to search quite broadly at first. So just search for counselling, for example, and see what comes up. And what you'll find is that you can check the detail by reading the unit, not simply the title. And you need to provide evidence eventually that your course is not covered by any existing qualification or through the use of current packaging rules. Accreditation reviewers will review the existing training products to determine if they already exist, and accreditation can't be granted by TAC if it's found that there is actually duplication. So in the example on the screen, you'll see there are a number of units on the National Register that relate to counselling, and because I've searched broadly, it's pulled up financial counselling and relationship counselling, and then just counselling. And I've also on the same screen just dropped down, I haven't dropped down accredited courses 8 results or the units and modules 63 results, but I have dropped down the one showing you the units of competency, and I've highlighted one of those there, which is a unit from the Community Services training package, because even if you were going to develop a course in holistic counselling, you might consider that something about establishing and confirming the counselling relationship would still be relevant. And so you would actually click through onto that particular unit and have a look at it and see whether or not you thought it was appropriate. What I've done on this screen, though, is to show you parts of the following information, which are not always all together on the screen. But you'll see that there's information before you read on to the detail of the actual unit of competency, which we're not going to do. You'll see that you can see which training packages it's already in. You can also see which accredited courses have imported it as well. And you'll notice there I've highlighted one, which is actually a certificate for in holistic counselling and mind-body medicine. And then down the bottom, I've actually showed you, I've clicked on that particular accredited course to see what was in it. And I've only showed you part of it because they had actually 14 units of competency in their particular qualification. And all but 3 of them were imported from both the health training package and the community services training package. But you can see there's 3 at the bottom there where they've made up their own code, and you can see mind-body medicine is what they've actually used in the code, which would give you a clue that even though they're saying it's holistic counselling, that it must have a real flavour of mind-body medicine. And the third one there you can see, which is provide basic flower essence therapy. If your view of holistic counselling had nothing to do with mind-body medicine or flower essence therapy, then you would probably be quite okay to go ahead and start thinking about developing the course. You would probably still talk to Community Services and Health national body to make sure that they didn't have anything that also was quite holistic in the counselling area. stage 2 of our flowchart. Well, it's not in the flowchart, but in our staged approach. When developing a course, there are a number of aspects that we need to keep in mind. You see the first one up there. Not just reflect the requirements, but accurately and realistically reflect the needs. In the second one, you can develop your performance and knowledge outcomes by considering industry standards, educational standards, doing some sort of occupational analysis or skills audit, looking at data on emergency technology and industry trends. You might do a job function analysis if it relates closely to a particular job, look at job adverts, look at position descriptions and role statements if these jobs are already in place, or talk to people if it's coming, emerging role, talk to the people who know what it's likely to have in it. And you might also be referring to manuals, operating procedures, textbooks, and so on, depending on what the course is about. You also, of course, have to consider the needs of learners who are most likely to enrol in the course and what job outcomes they might be aiming for. You should consider a flexible course structure, depending on what you're trying to achieve, of course, because you are trying to suit industry and learner needs, so some flexibility might be good. You should avoid artificial barriers to entry or progression. And to do that, you would minimise any prerequisites. You might think about having a core and elective structure or a small core with some free electives. But having said that, courses addressing niche markets often have a core-only structure because they're not aimed at a general body of people. They're aimed at a particular outcome. And so they're not trying to duplicate broad courses that lead to various different industry outcomes. Every application of the training package, of the packaging rules that you create, must create a course that meets the proposed AQF level of the course. And keep in mind that any changes required after the course is accredited will require an amendment application and therefore a fee. That $22.90 fee would also apply. So you need to be talking to your industry people or your stakeholders beforehand to make sure that you get it right pretty much so that you don't have to make any changes afterwards. The next one there is about enabling the recognition of course units of competency to promote credit transfer. Continuing to build on your preliminary research and consultation to assist in determining the acceptable modes of delivery for your target group, and thinking about the demographic of your target group, the age, gender, cultural background, language, educational level, and so on. And then, of course, your course will be reviewed against the AQTF 2021 standards for accredited courses. So it's important to make sure you are familiar with this particular document when writing your course. Some common mistakes that are made by course owners are these. It's quite common when course owners are RTOs that they write the document to reflect themselves, how they will deliver and assess, and they even write that. Sometimes they start by writing it to apply to everyone. Partway through, they start talking about what they're going to do. Sometimes the structure of the new course or the qualification packaging rules don't actually allow your vocational outcomes to be met. So sometimes all the key requirements are in the electives. And so when you apply the packaging rules, you can do the course and not actually achieve the vocational outcomes that the owner has decided they're aiming for. You need to ensure a balance between core and elective, that they lead to realistic outcomes which meet the needs of your industry, and consider the possibility of wider application in industry over time. You certainly don't want to have something that only lasts a short period of time. Sometimes assessment strategies don't match the course delivery methodologies prescribed, or sometimes they don't support the collection of valid, authentic, current and sufficient evidence, which of course RTOs have to do. Sometimes there's no validation of trainer and assessor competencies in relation to the assessment requirements, and no consideration that sometimes trainers and assessors need additional vocational competencies over and above the standards for RTOs to deliver and assess the particular qualification. This is particularly so in courses like literacy and numeracy. You can imagine someone doing a Certificate 2 in literacy and numeracy is not going to be able to teach that, even though the standards for RTOs actually say your vocational competencies must be at or above the level. But of course, you know, literacy courses are delivered by literacy specialists, and most of them are university trained and have worked in the industry for a period of time. So you would expect in an accredited course that that would be reflected in the requirements in your course document, and perhaps even in the units of competency. The course you create needs to provide an unambiguous basis for a TAC reviewer to evaluate each RTO's readiness to deliver the course. So this is the TAC auditor when it gets into the RTO, and so the subsequent valid delivery of the course. So keep in mind the requirements of the standards for RTOs as well, because that's what delivery and assessment of your course will eventually be audited against. So units of competency. We're going to take a look at the units of competency just in terms of how they are structured. We've already said there's a full webinar on how to actually write them. But you've got the two definitions up there, which I won't read out. So as a developer, you need to have identified the work activity and what it involves, the complexity or level of sophistication of the work, so it can be eventually aligned, the course can eventually be aligned to the AQF. That's if it's a qualification, of course. If it's a short course, it doesn't. You must consider the knowledge and performances that's required to undertake the work activity, the conditions under which the work activity may be conducted, evidence that's required to confirm that a person can competently undertake the work activity, any foundation skills required. These should be included in the performance criteria whenever possible. We don't really, in accredited courses, we don't encourage tables of these. We want them actually included in the performance criteria, so it's not an extra burden on RTOs trying to work out the foundation skills and how they fit. If a foundation skill is really important, like you have to be able to write a report, then that should appear in the performance criteria in the competency rather than in a separate table. You think about the evidence that would be needed in assessing the unit of competency, any specific conditions under which assessment must be undertaken, and any resources that may be needed to gather the evidence, including assessor requirements over and above what's in the standards for RTOs. So this is just a picture of the components in our endorsed unit. The template that must be used is the one that we've actually given you as a handout, and it's got a lot of blue text in it that is guidance for you and must be deleted from the final document. Most people download two versions of this, so they keep one as a guide and the other one they write in the spaces and delete the blue text as they go. It's especially important for reaccreditation, of course, that you use the latest templates. And we are always improving our templates, so you always have to go and have a look. Courses are accredited for 5 years, and after 5 years we did change our templates because we moved our templates to the streamlined version in expectation of the standards for accredited courses coming in. And of course you must meet the AQTF standards for accredited courses, and you must meet the requirements of the template, because that is what your course will be reviewed against. Your units of competency must be written in a standard format and contain these essential components that you can see on the screen. This promotes national consistency, helping to ensure that units from a range of training packages and accredited courses can be easily understood by various users. It also enhances recognition of competency and transferability and portability of qualifications. And if you're an RTO and you have other courses on scope, it enables you, if you want to import some of your accredited units into your other courses, and also people from outside who might find out that there's a really good accredited unit might contact you and want permission to actually import your units, some of your units or some of your modules into their particular courses. The components of the unit are set out in the template, and there's blue text in a small font under each heading which indicates which ones are mandatory. So you can see on the screen, prerequisite units are optional, range of conditions is an optional component as well. But as a course developer, if you decide that they're in, then for anyone using the course, they are also mandatory. It's only optional for you as a developer. Once you decide it's in, then it's mandatory for anyone, any RTO that then delivers the course. The national template for the unit of competency is based on the template from the standards for training packages, so you will also meet those standards, which is good because all our units of competency in our accredited courses are of the same quality, usually better quality than in training packages. And of course you must, I've already said this, you must follow the instructions in the template exactly. If you're re-accrediting a course, you must present your course documents and units in the latest template. In this webinar, we're not going through each of the components in the unit, as a full webinar has been developed to actually go through each of those in great detail to help you write really good units of competency. And the recording, as Claire said at the beginning, will actually be on the website. So if you're interested in that particular webinar, you can actually listen to that and watch those slides as well. Into access and equity. So it's really important that our units of competency meet the needs of the diversity of our potential learners and workplaces. So using the following approaches will assist this. Plain English. So no jargon or unclear language and terminology that's not relevant to the workplace. Make sure that it's adaptable to a range of workplace contexts, because all workplaces are different, even though the industry area that you're writing the course for will be standard. You keep in mind that you need a certain amount of adaptability. Using inclusive language to ensure that it's inclusive of the full diversity of your intended learners. Allowing for a reasonable adjustment. You also need to consider any limits to reasonable adjustment for learners with a defined disability, and add information wherever relevant and practicable. Flexibility in terms of your assessment options, for example, allowing learners to demonstrate competency in a range of ways where this meets the needs of the learner and doesn't compromise attainment of the competency. Providing a simulated workplace, for example, may provide equitable access for remote learners or unemployed learners, or asking oral questions instead of written may provide equitable access to learners with literacy issues. Sometimes culturally specific competencies are appropriate. For example, if you think about community governance qualifications in the business services training package, they actually include Indigenous ways of working and Indigenous governance styles, because the particular qualifications are aimed at that particular group. Also recognise diversity. Some communities and industries require their employees to have competencies which recognise and address the diversity and special needs of those they work with, such as competencies for working with diverse communities, for example. Okay. So if you have a look at your handouts now, and the activity sheets, you'll see that you actually have 4 tasks to do now. The first task is about course duration, hours and volume of learning. Then the second task is just about the units that are listed in the course. The third one is some assessor requirements that are listed in 2 different places, and I want you to just have a look at those. And the last one is about assessment requirements. And what you're doing is you're just going to spend 5 minutes for all 4 tasks, so basically a minute on each task. So you don't have to look in great detail, you're just looking for anomalies or anything that you think is a bit strange. What happens is people write information in one part of the course document and in another part, and they don't actually line up very well. So this is just to see if you can be an accreditation reviewer and see, just flag anything that you think is an anomaly. So 5 minutes from now, and then we'll be back. Okay, we're back. So in the first one, you'll notice that in section 1.2 of the course document, there's a place where you have to actually put the nominal duration of your course. And then later on, there's another section where it asks for the volume of learning. And then further on still in section 5.1 is where you actually identify the course structure. So in the first scenario, 400 hours was identified as the nominal duration for the course. Then 750 hours was identified for the volume of learning, so far so good. Then you go to section 5.1 and you find that there are 5 units, nominal hours of 150 hours each, totaling 750 hours. And this is a problem because the nominal hours, when you add them up in section 5.1, should equal the course duration. So it should have added up to 400, not up to 750. And so in this particular case, the person had actually added on all of the unstructured learning, but they'd done it unit by unit, which is not what we do. We work out our volume of learning for the entire qualification. So the nominal duration of the course and the nominal hours for my individual units, they should be the same when you actually add up the units. And in this case, probably they were probably 80 hours each, I would say, and they've added 70 hours on top of unstructured learning for each one. But that's not the way you do it. You normally just do 5 units at 80 hours each. And then when you come to the volume of learning, you discuss the fact that in their own time, students need to do an additional 350 hours. In the second one, 600 hours for the nominal duration, 10 units, differing nominal hours, which is what usually happens. Usually our units are not all the same size, but 10 units of all differing hours, but adding up to 600. So straight away that matches what's in the nominal duration, which is correct. And then for the volume of learning, even though it's been written as 1 year here, it's accepted that an academic year is 1,200 hours. So this would mean that there's a student commitment of 600 hours on top of the nominal hours for the course. And these 2 examples are fictional, but they are real examples from accreditation reviews that we've actually undertaken. Now, this next screen is simply what you've already looked at in task 2. And this is the first piece of information that you looked at, and you assume that this is correct. This is actually correct because this is the course structure. It shows you the course codes and unit titles. It shows you the nominal hours for each of those units. You can see that there is 1 imported unit of competency there, and you can see whether they're core or elective. So this information is correct. Then let's look at number 2, which should, although it has a different purpose, this particular table, the information should be the same in here as it was in that very first one. But you'll notice that the previous units, the heading on the table says previous units, but in fact they're actually the new units. And then the next column, which is supposed to be for your revised unit, new unit, has actually been reversed. So you can see the NA next to it saying it's a new unit. So that should have been in that particular column. So some people find it difficult because they expect to write the new unit first rather than the previous unit. So make sure you look at the headings on the tops of the tables so that you actually get them in the right place. The other thing that happened in this table was that there are less zeros in here than there are in the original one. So the original one had 3 zeros for each of the new units that had been developed. In the third table, this is from section C, so this is actually the units of competency where you're actually again asked for a list, and in this list you simply say whether they're core or elective. What's happened here is that the codes have been reversed, and these are all real examples, let me tell you, although I've made up the units of competency in the codes. But develop business skills actually belongs to ABC RST 0002, so those two codes have been reversed by the time you get to here. And the BSB MGT unit has suddenly managed to get an extra G, N, an extra N. Yes, because it was MGT, now it's MNGT. And also it's changed now, instead of being an elective unit, it's been written as a core unit. So again, that's another anomaly there. And again, this happens all the time. I'll be reading something and I go, hang on, what was the original code that they actually wanted to use? And I'll find that it'll be different. And same with the ones, the imported units. Sometimes the codes are not quite correct, and of course they need to be absolutely spot on if you are importing a unit from a training package. In the next one, in task 3, some of the information is from the course document, and the second column is information from the units of competency. So in this first one, you can see that it's got an additional requirement over and above the standards for RTOs. So it says that that assessors must hold a higher education qualification in business and have at least 5 years experience in a business development role. So whatever this particular course was about, that was the decision of the industry stakeholders. They felt that you couldn't just hold the qualification and then deliver the same qualification, you needed experience. But when you went to the units of competency, they simply said they must hold the training and assessment qualification required by RTO standards current at the time of assessment. And so in that case, number one, they've left out the vocational requirements altogether and only said you need your TAE basically. And also they haven't considered the fact that in the course document, it actually says you trainers and assessors have to have more than just what's in the standards for RTOs. In the second one, the two requirements are pretty much the same. So the first one says they have to satisfy the assessor requirements in the standards for registered training organisations current at the time of assessment. Now this is quite common, and it's starting to happen in training packages as well, where because things change so often, we don't want to have to be coming back and changing our units all the time. So we make sure that we write something that's a bit future-proofed. And so instead of saying the standards for RTOs 2015, we're starting to see this more commonly across the board, and also in the training packages. The second one, the second column there, must satisfy, says the same thing, and then it goes on to say they must also be vocationally competent, industry current. And that information is of course redundant because it's already contained within those. And I think it was just that someone's trying to make the point, and so they're repeating a requirement that's already in the standards. And although it wasn't necessary, I would point this out as an inconsistency and possibly an opportunity for improvement. It's not a non-compliance. But if the course developer really did want to emphasise the two separate requirements, they would have been better to just quote from clauses 113 and 114 separately, so that both of those things were actually identified and up in lights if that's what they were after. In task 4, you'll see again we're comparing what's in the course document in 6.1, which is the assessment requirements section, as against what's in the assessment requirements in the units of competency. And in this case, we've got a statement saying in the course document, saying that they have to demonstrate their practical skills on 3 occasions. And then when you go to the unit of competency, it actually says on at least 1 occasion. And the person who wrote this actually argued with me and said they were the same thing, because at least 1 occasion could be 3, but of course at least 1 occasion could be 2, 4, 6, whatever. So I wasn't going to wear that. And I just said, well, whatever you decide, they have to be consistent with each other. The wording must be consistent. It's also probably better to use consistent terminology in the course document. So instead of saying theory and practical, probably better to say knowledge requirements and performance requirements. Then it lines up with the sorts of terminology we're actually using in our units of competency now in the streamlined format for them. In the second one, the course requirement is a bit contradictory anyway in that first one, because on the one hand you start saying it must be included, and then you say, oh well, if not, if it's not appropriate. And of course we don't like appropriate in our space, in our accreditation space, because who decides what's appropriate? So probably if you were going to write this, you would put where possible at the beginning of your first statement. Where possible, they must be conducted, assessment must be in the workplace. And then instead of saying where it's not appropriate, actually work out what you mean by that and write that. And some good examples in training packages where they say where you can't cover off on contingencies, or it's dangerous, or there's a privacy issue if you're actually working with clients, for example, then that's the case when it would be simulated, rather than simply saying when appropriate. All we're doing is causing problems for RTOs if we write undefined terms like that. And in the right-hand one, it actually says, it has that note that used to be in all the business services units, but it's now gone. If a specific volume or frequency is not stated, then evidence must be provided at least once. And of course, it was pointed out that no one can meet the principles of assessment, the rules of evidence, if you only do it once. And so I noticed that that has actually gone from the latest version of the training, of the business training package. But in this case, we're comparing what it says in the performance evidence against what it says in the assessment conditions. And in this case, the assessment conditions required performance over a period of 120 hours in at least one operational workplace. So it's not a good idea to have things like that that don't really fit nicely together. Probably better just simply to say that you want things to meet the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence anyway. All right, let's go on. Okay, so now you've got everything organised and you've made sure everything's consistent, and you're going to actually prepare the rest of your documents. It's time to actually write your actual course document. And I've showed you some inconsistencies between different areas, so make sure that whatever you put in one section is consistent with the rest. You also have to fill in the ACC1 accreditation application. It's good to keep in mind the fact that the application and the accredited course document have different primary audiences. When you're writing your application, you're talking to TAC. You're trying to provide convincing justification of the need for the course, the industry, individuals or organisations supporting your accreditation, evidence of the research to show that no duplication has occurred. But by the time you're starting to write the accredited course document, now you're speaking to RTOs who deliver the course. And of course, TAC is checking that document to make sure the content meets the standards, but it does mean that all that comprehensive information that should be in the application, now you really just want a summary of that in the course document. So RTOs have a clear idea of the purpose of your course and the context in which it was actually developed. The Council will only accredit courses that meet the standards, of course, and by meeting the standards for accredited courses, you will also meet the standards for training packages for your individual units of competency. Applications can only be submitted by the course owners. This is important. So if you're not the course owner but you've helped with the development of it, you cannot actually do the application. It must be done by the course owner and must be submitted by the course owner. When they must be submitted using the actual application forms from the TAC website. You can't complain about the fact that you don't like writing in PDFs and you prefer to send in a Word document. Well, that's not acceptable. You must actually use the accredited course forms that are actually there. So you'll have 3 main documents plus all your evidence. You'll have your application form, you'll have your course document using the template, you'll have your units using the proper templates, and you'll have evidence. And this evidence is actually listed in the application form, and it has things like copies of all important units of competency contained in the course must be included, evidence of consultation with your stakeholders, letters of support that people have given you, evidence of industry validation of the course, evidence of consulting with an SSO or a WA training council, or even an industry licensing or regulatory body if applicable, and evidence of any recognition that's given to the course by professional bodies. And of course your invoice must be actually included as well. And then the next step, of course, is that there's an assessment of the application by TAC against the standards. It goes out to an accreditation reviewer, and if the reviewer determines or recommends that it's compliant to TAC, then it goes to the next scheduled council meeting for consideration. If the application is not compliant, of course, you're given your 20 working days and to prepare and submit additional evidence, and then after that it would then go to the next council meeting. Accreditation is, of course, granted for 5 years, and unless there are special circumstances that warrant a lesser duration. For example, a training package 4-year plan might have the units already under development, and so you might just be given a couple of years, even if they said they were within 1 year of releasing in a training package. We all know what that means, and so you probably might get a 3-year period rather than a 5-year period. Or, you know, if it's imminent and TAC knows it's about to be released, then you might only get a year, for example. But across the board, most people get the 5-year period because there's no duplication anyway. Then you receive your letter and your certificate, and then the course document, of course, with its developed units will be watermarked and returned to you electronically, and that's what you need to provide to anyone that you license, any RTO you license or franchise to deliver the course. The third one down, TAC allocates a national code, and you'll find that it'll be, for WA courses, it's a number in the 50,000s. So it'll start with a 5 with 4 digits after it, and WA on the end to show that it was actually accredited in WA. And then, of course, the last one is that it has to be added to scope, and if you're the course owner, it still has to be added to your scope. The course owners who wish to deliver their own accredited course will still need to register. Will need to register as an RTO if they're not an RTO, or make alternative arrangements for delivery with someone who is already an RTO. And then stage 6, which is outside the accreditation process, but which is an obligation for course owners under the standards, is that you will do ongoing monitoring. And of course, this is not about the evaluation of the delivery of the course. It's about its effectiveness in meeting the needs of the enterprise industrial community that it serves. And a need for change is often identified through feedback from employers, industry, graduates, and students who are working will be doing the course and tell you that that's not how it's done in the workplace, which will force you back to review what you actually got. Any changes to workplace practice or new technology might cause you to want to change something. Might have been regulatory changes or national policy changes. They're the reasons, and of course, in standard 5.15 of the new standards, there's also a requirement for course owners to advise RTOs who are licensed or franchised about any changes they make, because otherwise they're getting audited as an RTO, and of course they're not using the latest course document because you didn't tell them that changes were made, and by the way, here's the latest course document. So that is an obligation for you as well. And then of course you've got tax biennial survey, which comes to you every 2 years, and this is an opportunity for you to look at your course and confirm that it's still current and relevant. And then of course if you do make any changes, in the course document, you make a statement that says you will notify TAC of any changes. And of course, if there are major changes, of course, you may in fact have to re-accredit the course. So, you know, you'd be wise to actually talk to TAC about any changes that you're making to make sure they are minor. And then if they are really major, then you'd be given advice that in fact you might need to do a re-accreditation process. Okay, any questions? Do you have questions here? Or not? Nope. So if you do think of anything after the course, and also we do send you out a survey after you've watched the webinar, asking you to provide feedback on how the session could be improved, and there are the numbers on the screen. Use the email rather than ring, it's much better, because then you everyone works different shifts. And so to get your query answered well quickly, then it's probably better to actually put it in an email. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time this morning.